I'm going to kick it off with some things, because the point of this panel is really to think about and to walk through some things that engineers should know when they're building for data scientists. And I find this fascinating because we're starting to see that there is certain things that you want to keep in mind, and maybe a data scientist, it's second nature to them, but for an engineer, they don't even realize it. So the goal for this panel is to highlight some of the most common challenges when engineers and data scientists interact with each other, especially the surprising ones. We want to share solutions with the audience that they can implement on their own, right? Some actionable insights, and share problem areas that still persist and we need to figure out. So let's start off this first question, and I'm going to kick it over to you first, Kate. How are data scientists and engineers different and similar in how they approach problem solving?
Good question. Yeah, I think first off, I would like to say that data scientist is such an umbrella term that is very polluted with different flavors right now. So one data scientist is not going to do the same work as another one. It's very hard to find two people who approach either their work or stack or problem solving the same way. And it's starting to change, as we saw in the last year, some analytics engineers or ML engineers roles started popping up, which make it a little bit easier. But overall, I think it really depends also on the scale of the company and domain that you're working in. How much of engineering will there be in your data science role? And how different are you going to be from what we perceive as a standard software engineer or a data engineer?
I love it. Mark, you got any take on this?
I mean, Kate did an excellent job. I think one way I like to think about is like, where in the data life cycle do people sit? And one of the key things where I see software engineers fitting is they are data creators. This is coming from a product side, but they're data creators. They're creating the surfaces in which our data is going to be collected within a product. And also they're data surfacers. So, we build these insights, and then they take this amazing data and they show it in the product to the end user. So that's like, those are very two important parts that data science itself doesn't really touch often. And so there's a key partnership with that, and thinking about that implementation and ingestion of data. And so it really is a team effort. And so it behooves us to really work with each other.
I love it. Maria, you've got a bit of a different take. Coming from the user experience side, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Sure. And let me just say that at Spotify, my role is actually to serve as a user researcher for machine learning engineers. So I work with data scientists. I think one thing I want to say, and I'm finding this, I'm hosting a conference this year for quantitative user research, and it's like, is that a thing actually, or is it a competency? And I think those are the questions with data science and machine learning that we're asking a lot. I do think that the scale and the resources of the organization impact a lot what's available. At Spotify in general, I do see data scientists mostly functioning as insight generators. We've talked about potentially, there are data scientists that fill different business contexts, so they might be doing more on the engineering side, but I tend to interact with most data scientists in the context that they're generating insight. I think my take is that at the size and sort of scale of the company that I'm working at now, you can kind of afford to have people specialize maybe more in an area, whereas maybe if you're in a scrappier situation, you need to do what you need to do to get it done.
Great point. Now, let's keep moving. And I want to hear from you, Alice. And I want to know, like, if you can give us a brief summary of how engineers and data scientists are collaborating at your company, Depop.
Sure. I've just realized that my background is back to front. I hope that's not too off-putting for anyone.
No, it's cool. It's good. You're a new trendsetter.
So our teams are all pretty cross-functional. So most teams will have a handful of engineers, a couple of data scientists, maybe some front end, some back end, and a PM. And I think just going back to the previous question briefly, because it relates to how they work together. I think something that's really hard for software engineers to understand about data scientists is our experimental approach. And it's very frustrating, I think, if you're used to being a PM or an engineer somewhere that can like plan quite cleanly far ahead. It's a real expectation of adaptation that they can then tolerate me being like, I don't know what my final solution is going to be. I'm going to try these things though. But we've found working really closely and just communicating a lot really helps. So if you say this experiment is looking better, this experiment is looking worse, kind of can help with that interface.
Yeah, makes sense. So Kate, I'm going to throw it over to you. And how are engineers and data scientists collaborating where you're at? Are there that cross functionality like Alice was saying, or do you stay in your lane per se?
Well, I mean, again, it depends. So like if a project has enough resources and it's a fully complected team, we have pretty clear boundaries of where my work ends and where your work starts. So I can really focus, as Maria was mentioning, on like my swim lane and like go really deep into it. However, sometimes there would be some kind of a moonshot 20% project that you just want to explore a topic and it feels more like a hacking thing together. And so whatever you can offer to it, you're going to go for it. Be it starting to create a podcast about this project because you want to get more interest. So like it can even step outside of the engineering world, absolutely, entirely. But overall, like in a perfect scenario, if the resources are there, we would have like an SRE supporting us, data engineers supporting us to like, again, to get the access to the right things and the data in the right place. And then also maybe a bunch of data scientists, right? Or ML engineers.
I get the feeling, Maria, this is pretty day-to-day for you. You've thought a lot about it. Can I hear your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, and just to clarify, it's how there's partnership with engineering.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah.
So in a sense, the way that, you know, I partner with engineering or also data scientists partner with engineering is really helping to define needs and exploring spaces, really problem space definition. I think I spend the most time on because I find that, you know, other populations, like we talk about engineers, certainly product managers are solution oriented, right? So really to contribute a well-designed solution, I think our engineers get the luxury of us helping them really become experts on the problem.
Oh, that's awesome. That's super cool to hear. And
oh yes, everything's perfect.
all right then, you took us there. Let's hear it. Where's the pain? Where's the pain? Tell us. You can't just say that and expect for me to gloss over it.
I think that one of the challenges I see in terms of like working in a more insight generation role versus, you know, and not that everything's so clean. Certainly I work on solutions as well, but timeline differences and cultural practices that are just different. You know, I am sort of really more interested in knowing the problem. And a lot of times that's seen as like a time suck. You know, like, oh, I don't know how that fits into the sprint, how that fits into the cycle, you know, and certainly I'm probably the most qualitative person here. I need some deep heads down time alone, or I can't help you know the nature of the problem. So there's often a mismatch of sort of time sequencing and the ways people work operationally.
So I actually have a follow-up question for you, Maria, because that kind of brought up this kind of pain point I had as a data scientist when I first started off, is that many times the requests you get for data science are very vague and often the wrong ask first, whether it's from stakeholders or from engineers. And so I work in startups, so I don't have the luxury of having all these specialized teams, but I'm curious your role in doing UX and being this bridge between these different teams. What have you found to be really successful translators between these different teams?
So do you mean like techniques or ways of working that really help?
So it's not necessarily techniques, but like, say for instance, like a business stakeholder might ask, like, can I get the numbers for XYZ, you know, into this dashboard? And many times like the XYZ like ask is actually completely wrong, and the real ask is like deeper in there. And so as a data scientist, I have to like dig through that a lot. Do you find with your role you're able to really just cut to what's really important to really translate between these technical teams?
So I think that and I'm actually a quantitative researcher by training, but having skills in the qualitative skill set really help, because as user researcher, one of your crucial like kickoff things that you do as a stakeholder interview, and you learn how to do information gathering first, because typically it's similar to your scenario. Someone will come with me with a methodology. They already have it picked out. They're going to tell me how to do the study, which is fine. I'm not saying they're often correct, but I actually often help my data scientists find out what they are going to kind of need, because I am given a little more space and leeway to parse in the more nuanced area, because of UX research normally gets associated with qualitative research. So I tend to be that bridge. And unfortunately, I do think that data scientists do get associated with more of the engineering culture and analytics. And it's like, oh, just go find this thing. Whereas data scientists, many of them are interested in user stories as well, right? They're trying to know the nature of the problem as well, and they need time to do that. So I often run interference that way. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's been one of the ways I do it. I don't think there are a lot of allies for data scientists that way, to be honest with you. I think user research could serve as one of the greatest allies to data science in terms of insight generation, because we've been working in that business for a while. So
good. So I'm gonna switch it up, and Alice, I'm gonna throw this one at you. It's a little bit spicier of a question. What's some of the main friction or frustrations that you've seen between data scientists and data engineers, or just engineering in general?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent one to our company at the moment. So the way that data science was initially integrated into the company, they were sort of second-class engineering citizens. So none of the DevX was set up for them. I think there's a difference where things are blocked by default. If you're an engineer, like, they protect you by not letting you accidentally break things. Whereas if you're a data scientist, you'd need to like install a load of packages and all this sort of thing. So it was essentially, well, no, I was going to be a bit rude. It's not the worst way you could set up an environment for a data scientist, but it was kind of close. So I think one of the things that we've been working through with the engineering team is like, how can we change from like a blocked by default to like an experimental by default approach that lets the data scientist kind of iterate and be a bit freer.
Okay, I like that. And I was hoping for the rudeness, but you're very polite, and I appreciate you keeping your posture or your politeness in this. Kate, what about you? You got stuff and you want to be a bit more raw?
Well, I mean, one of the things that comes up in my day-to-day work is that if you're really mad at how something is done, propose a better way, reach out to that person. If you really hate how your data scientist codes something and it breaks every time, or vice versa, just sit down with them, do a knowledge sharing session, and show them how it's done better, because maybe it's like the 500th tool that they had to use to do their job to adjust to the company stack, and they're not going to be like straight away the best at it. And it takes so little effort to fix and find a common bridge and make everyone happy, but like usually people are too busy to even consider that. And it's just a shame, it could have been so simple.
Could have, and be the change you want to see in the world, huh? So Mark, I know you got some thoughts. I also want to spotlight what you said. I don't think you put it for everyone in here, but you mentioned that UX folks basically give you the cheat code on the insights. I think that's hilarious. But what are some frictions that you've seen? What are some challenges that you've faced?
Definitely. I think one of the main challenges is that engineers and data scientists think differently. I can't remember who presented this in this group, but it's basically that experimentation phase is very frustrating, I think, for engineers, because many times for engineers, you have your like technical spec and you're like, here's our end goal. you write the code and like you see, does it work in the product? Yes or no? Are there any bugs, right? And that's a huge simplification engineering. So take that for what it is. There's a lot more complexity to it. But on the data science side, we have this additional step of iterating of like, cool, we did all the right things, just the data sucks or our insight was wrong. And we have to try something new and not be biased. And so a lot of our stuff is like, yeah, we want to try new things over and over again, but we're going to be very intentional of not just throwing all the data and slicing and dicing it in a way to make our desired output. And so I think the challenge is working with engineering is like communicating that iterative part. And that's a big reason why whenever I work on projects, like I add like an extra week to say when I'm gonna have something done, because there's this iterative part, and I put in time for understanding the constraints of what I'm working on and what's gonna blow up potentially. And so getting that across to engineering, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, like they're like data generators. If you can communicate, that's like the thing you have to iterate on, and we need those clues to figure out what's the best thing to move forward with. Getting that embedded within the engineering kind of culture of like, oh yeah, this is why we collect this data. We're not just doing it for extra work. Helps out a lot in that friction point.
I love that. Now, let's move on to a new question, and I'll throw it over to you, Kate, first. I want to know at OLX, who is responsible for the model in production? Are data scientists getting put on PagerDuty, or are they getting woken up at 3 a.m. when things go haywire?
Well, personally, I wouldn't be 100% sure because I don't have any mission critical ML models in production. From what I've observed so far, I'm not sure again about the PagerDuty, but every project has their own kind of distribution of ownership. And again, we also have the SREs that kind of are the main guards of everything working on the spot. So it really depends. I wouldn't say there would be like one single person that is always there to monitor everything. And again, we're also not doing any, it's not like we're doing cancer screenings or something that is like very impactful to people's lives. So that I don't think if something breaks, it would be such a massive impact that you would have to constantly look for people to like fix it and blame right away, like the second it happens.
Great point. How about you, Alice? Have you gotten woken up in the middle of the night because a model gone rogue?
Oh, realistically, we're getting there, and we're all putting it off as much as we can. Our current PagerDuty is like daytime hours, so you know who's responsible for it if it breaks, but you don't have to fix it until the morning. But ask me again in a month, and I think it'll be middle of the night stuff. Yeah.
Ooh, interesting. And who is the one that's responsible? Is it you? Are the engineers? Are the data scientists? Is it a collaboration between the two?
It's nearly always a collaboration. I tend to be notified, but I don't go and fix it so much these days. It's the data scientists that built it often, or they're in small groups, so just someone in that group that understands it and an engineer together.
Makes sense. Mark, how about yourself?
So I've been thinking about this a lot. Thankfully, I don't have PagerDuty, but as Alice kind of noticed, like as you increase complexity and stuff, that's going to become very necessary. And I'm increasing complexity at the jobs I work at, startups I work at, and so eventually we're going to get to that point. And I've been asking a lot of mentors and people who work at these larger companies, what are you doing to manage this? And over the years, something that keeps on popping up over and over again are RACI matrices. And RACI stands for responsible, accountable, not confounded, consulted, and then informed. Had the data science hat on right there. But essentially, you create this matrix for all these different tasks. It can be very high level or low level, and it makes it very clear to delineate responsibilities. And when I did this exercise with my team, we went through the whole data lifecycle, and then like the various engineering subdomain teams, the data science subdomain teams, and the leadership. And we went through this matrix and became very clear where the bottlenecks are or where the gaps are for these things. And we're able to get on board, still implementing it. So still early, but it was such a like eye-opening experience of like, why haven't we done this before? and makes this very clear delineation early before conflict to solve things.
Ooh. Yeah, that seems like a best practice. I mean, for everyone that does not know, one thing that I have learned from talking to you a few times, Mark, is that you've got so many acronyms and frameworks, and I love it, man. Please write a blog post sometime with all of your frameworks and acronyms, please, because I just want to hear them all.
Super appreciate it. It's the only way I remember things. So I talk to a lot of mentors, a lot of people who are way more experienced than me, and I condense it in the way I can remember it.
Yeah. What was that acronym you just said? Because I didn't quite catch it.
RACI matrix, so RACI.
Okay.
And a lot of project management people have figured out way better than I ever could. So you'll probably see a lot of great project management folks really detail it to a great degree.
Excellent. All right. We've got another one. I want to know, Kate, how do you feel about productionizing machine learning versus productionizing software? Are they different? What is different? What is shared? I know there's a lot of people that ask in the MLOps community, like, oh, but MLOps, it's just DevOps, right? But what parts can we say, yes, those are fundamental software productionizing procedures? And then where do we go a little off track?
As a disclaimer, I have not productionized software as a first step, but I think the major difference is the data, right? The data that's coming in, the data that you've trained the model on, and the output. So like that is the largest chunk that makes it so different, and that can also act very unpredictably, that you cannot always control, but you can monitor. So that would be the focus, I would guess.
Excellent.
And that's where everybody has hiccups and problems of how to better, what to look at, when to know, how do you know when the problem is coming, like soon enough before it's completely out of whack, right? So still working on it.
Yeah, things get a little dicey when you add data to the mix, don't they? So Alice, what about you? Do you have thoughts on how they differ, how they're the same?
Yes, I think there's like two specific things that stand out in addition, which would be kind of a regular deployment process. I think for people that deploy software, you do it as a one-off typically, maybe twice off if you've got a bug, but building into the process, the regular deployment, I think is quite tricky. And then the other thing is probably like expectation of testing and coverage. Like I think if you're building software, you can test things thoroughly, because it's not that experimental approach. Whereas for us, like testing a whole model end to end is really hard. And so if you have some sort of CI/CD process that's expecting coverage like software, you're going to really struggle to get stuff into production.
Great point. Let's keep moving. I want to throw this one out there, and Mark, I'll throw this at you first. Can or should data scientists evolve into engineers? I know this is something that you've thought about and you potentially are looking at doing. I know that you like engineering much more these days, but is that the path for most? Should we say that eventually data scientists should learn these best practices for coding just to make systems more reliable? Or should data scientists focus on building the models and spending their time where they can add the most value?
That's a that's $1 million question right there. That's a lot to unpack. But I think it really comes down to data maturity. What's the data maturity of your org and what's the use case for it? And so for me, like I'm always in startups. I love startups. So having the extra engineering skills, especially the data engineering skills, which I'm like heavily picking up now, is like a superpower now, because I have this understanding what the end product is should be for data science. And I go back and build all the infrastructure to like empower that, which is really fun to do at a startup. But if I was working at a large company, like say, Spotify, that has like all these different things, they're gonna be asking like, Mark, why are you working on all these different things? We have all these people who are hired who are way better at this. Focus on your main thing that can drive value. And I think that's where it really comes down to is, what stage is your company going to be at? and what stage you want to help take your company to the next level. And that should define whether or not you should focus on those engineering skills. So for me, being in startups, I heavily focus on engineering skills because it gives me a leg up to really move fast and not wait on engineering to build really cool things. As compared to a larger company, I would have to switch that tactic because they're more so focused on expanding their market share and like optimizing on what's really important. And so I need to focus more so on optimizing rather than like broad kind of skill set.
Yeah, I think I've been called on for the follow-up, but it seems natural anyway. I think we talk about that a lot. We talk about T-shapedness in all domains. I hate to hear data scientists being forced into engineering spaces, but of course I'm in a much more comfortable space. When you like startup culture, that's one of the things you love about it. And of course, I think we do foster and engender that at Spotify too. In hack culture, there are certainly data scientists that I talk to that are doing full-scale advanced machine learning applications, and they're really happy with it. And there's others who are really doing insight generation and staying within sort of a deeper lane as opposed to a broad lane. I think you maybe get the luxury of time and resource. You don't have to do it necessarily. You don't have to be the one who's paged at night. But of course, we know there's drawbacks to that big ship as well. I think, from a user experience perspective, and I'm going to wrap up this comment soon, we are trying to design systems and interfaces in the platform that house both of those types of exploration. Can you engage with machine learning at a level that is more sort of the top part of the T and also be that person who is really deep? Can you engage as someone who's more oriented towards knowledge production and research science, but also productionizing a model? So our platform offerings really try and focus on as much of that experience as we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we double click on that real fast? Because when you're building or when you're thinking about what you're going to build, and I imagine simplicity plays a huge role in that, because you want anybody, or you want people that are, it's maybe a little bit outside of their comfort zone, to start being able to leverage that. How does that play into it?
Sure. So I think awareness is actually one of the biggest problems. We find a lot of data scientists who could benefit from machine learning, but don't know they're having compute resource problems, or don't know that that's an issue. That's why it's interesting for us to talk about these less so as jobs and more so as competencies that you sort of pick up. I think we really try and orient ourselves towards, making efficient and seamless the experiences that we can. Where do you not need to have deep engineering knowledge to engage in this? Where can we kind of make it more seamless for you and have things done behind the scenes that you don't need to necessarily know about? And then where does the experience need to be more interactive so that you can look under the hood and learn? Because I find with data scientists and machine learning engineers, if they're looking at, the way a parameter behaves, they need to go under the hood in that experience. But there's also things, the efficiencies and things that can be automated for them that they don't need to sort of waste time in. It requires really deep contextual looking at the scenario that each individual finds themselves in. I think in the last talk, I heard the speaker say that they're not really a big fan of platformizing everything. And I would almost have to agree. It's really difficult, given the amount of context switching that we do, to make an end-to-end experience that every user can really engage with. So I'm just, as a qualitative researcher, trying to find those common spaces where someone needs to be able to learn and it will help them to learn, and then where they don't necessarily need to be bothered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And it brings up this point in my mind that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I know a few people have mentioned it to me in the community too, is looking at, when you're building systems, what parts do you automate and what parts do you feel like you need to be involved in? Because you don't want to automate something that's potentially wrong. And so maybe Alice, could you talk to me about how you think about automating versus bringing that human touch?
Sure. So I think we have different use cases for different products. So our recommendations, which we know really well, and if they go a bit wrong, it's just someone has a bit of a bad experience for a day, they're all auto retrained and fully automated. and we feel quite comfortable with that. But we have some products that are trust and safety based. So like if you think chats are getting abusive, or if you think someone's uploading fakes or trying to be fraudulent, and those, like, we would never consider automating the retraining of, because if it went wrong, it would have such a negative impact. So yeah, I think impact is just a big part of it for us.
Mark, you got some. I saw you nodding your head yes when I was talking about that.
My computer was actually about to crash, so I was actually nodding to try to get my my charger to work, so I can stay on this lovely panel. But if you repeat the question, I'm happy to go forward with it, or you can just skip me because you know, we have some amazing other panelists.
Well, I think we can actually take that as a sign and wrap it up, because this has been incredible, and I don't want your computer to die on us, Mark. I want to thank all of you, Kate, Alice, Maria, Mark. These insights were just superb, and it's cool to get these kind of diverse viewpoints, and hopefully some of the engineers that are watching have learned a little bit from what we talked about here. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dee. Thank you.
Thank you, so much fun.
Thanks for having us.